the sound of freedom. If you think you could survive swimming through freezing water with nothing but a stolen raincoat and a dream, hit that subscribe button. Because tonight, we dive into the real story of the men who defied America's most feared prison and vanished into the dark waters of the San Francisco Bay. June 12, 1962. The guards at Alcatraz Island perform their routine bed checks. The night is silent, wind whispering over the waves. Inside cell block B, 3 men lie in their bunks, faces still, sheets pulled to their shoulders. Everything looks normal until you lean closer. The heads on those pillows aren't breathing. They're not even human. They're papier-mâché, painted, with real hair glued to the top. And the men who slept there? Gone. The first alarm doesn't sound until dawn. Officer Bill Long notices something odd. One of the prisoners doesn't respond when he calls his name. He kicks the bunk. The head rolls onto the floor, shattering against the concrete. A hollow echo. For a moment, the entire cell block freezes. Then chaos erupts. Sirens scream across the island. Spotlights slice through fog. Guards scramble across tiers of steel and concrete, shouting over the deafening hum of the prison alarm. 3 inmates, Frank Morris and brothers John and Clarence Anglin, are nowhere to be found. Morris was no ordinary prisoner. Brilliant, meticulous, a man with an IQ that rivaled college graduates. He'd been locked up since his teens, constantly escaping from smaller prisons, earning the nickname the Ghost. The Anglin brothers, soft-spoken bank robbers from Florida, were just as daring. Together, they'd spent months digging through concrete walls using spoons, drill bits, and whatever scraps they could smuggle from the workshop. Behind their cells, they built a secret tunnel system that led into a utility corridor, dark, damp, and filled with humming pipes. Investigators later found an entire workshop hidden above the cell block, crude tools, a stolen accordion used to inflate a homemade raft, and over 50 stolen raincoats stitched into survival suits. They even created dummy heads to fool guards during nightly checks, complete with skin tone paint made from prison art supplies and soap. By sunrise, the FBI and Coast Guard were swarming the bay. Helicopters combed the cold, churning waters. Searchlights reflected off the surface like shards of glass. But there was no raft, no bodies. No trace of the men who had outsmarted Alcatraz. And then came the first twist. Floating near Angel Island, investigators found a torn paddle and part of a makeshift raft. But no one inside. Were the escapees dead, claimed by the freezing current? Or had they made it to shore, slipping quietly into a new life under new names? The only certainty was this. Alcatraz, the fortress no one could escape, had just been beaten. The hunt across the bay. By sunrise, the most feared words in American law enforcement echoed across radio waves. Escape from Alcatraz confirmed. The warden's office filled with panic. Guards who once bragged that nobody leaves the rock alive now stood in stunned silence. The FBI took command within hours. Helicopters thundered overhead, cutting through thick fog as Coast Guard cutters zigzagged across the frigid San Francisco Bay. It wasn't just a manhunt. It was a race against time and tide. Special Agent Frank Price, a meticulous investigator from the San Francisco field office, was first on the island. His team scoured every inch of the prison. The cells were like time capsules of obsession, scraps of metal sharpened into tools, piles of cement dust hidden behind vents, and those hauntingly lifelike dummy heads, staring blankly toward freedom. But what caught Price's attention most was what wasn't there. A hole carved behind Morris's sink, just wide enough for a man to squeeze through, leading into a hidden maintenance shaft. When investigators crawled through it, their flashlights revealed a maze of narrow corridors, dripping pipes, and hollow clangs that seemed to whisper their names back. They discovered a crude workshop built above the cell block roof, raincoats sewn together into life vests, makeshift paddles cut from plywood, and a primitive raft deflated, but intact enough to prove one thing. This wasn't desperation. It was design. Reports came flooding in from the Bay Area. A light spotted near Angel Island around 1 a.m. Faint splashes heard near the Golden Gate Bridge. A car stolen from Marin County the next morning. Every lead turned up cold. The men had vanished as if the sea itself had swallowed them. But the deeper the FBI dug, the stranger it got. The Anglin brothers' mother claimed she received and signed Christmas cards for 3 straight years, each one postmarked from different states. A family friend swore she saw them at her farm in Florida, alive and older. Others reported sightings in Mexico, Brazil, and even Sweden. Yet, not a single fingerprint, photograph, or record ever confirmed their existence. Behind closed doors, the Bureau wasn't celebrating. Alcatraz had been the government's symbol of control, a place where America sent the worst of the worst. If these 3 men had truly escaped, it wasn't just a jailbreak. It was a humiliation. As weeks turned into months, hope faded. The official line became simple: they drowned in the bay. But off record, investigators like Price weren't convinced. The currents were deadly, yes, but the tides that night had been unusually favorable. The wind was calm, the moonlight dim. If ever there was a night to defy Alcatraz, it was that one. Then, 6 months later, a fisherman near Angel Island made a discovery that reignited everything. A human bone, bleached white by the tide, lodged between the rocks. The men who became ghosts. When the fisherman reported the bone to authorities in January 1963, Alcatraz's legend roared back to life. Forensics rushed to the scene, sealing off the shoreline under thick morning fog. The discovery, what might have been a fragment of a human femur, set off another media frenzy. Reporters swarmed the bay, their headlines screaming, "The Alcatraz men found?" But when the lab results came back weeks later, the bone was determined to be animal. The mystery deepened. The FBI quietly reopened the file. Special Agent Frank Price, who had refused to believe the men drowned, was assigned to follow new leads. His first stop, the shoreline of Marin County. There he interviewed an elderly couple who claimed they heard muffled voices the night of the escape, voices pleading, gasping, carried by the wind. One witness, an ex-Coast Guard officer, described seeing what looked like a small raft bump against the rocks before slipping back into the dark. When the FBI swept the area days later, they found something, an old envelope floating half-buried in sand, sealed with water stains. Inside were photographs of the Anglin brothers as children. Price couldn't ignore the symbolism. Someone had taken the time to preserve those pictures, risking exposure just to carry them across the bay. "You don't pack family photos if you're planning to die," he murmured to his partner. Months passed. The investigation stretched into years. Alcatraz itself closed in 1963, barely a year after the escape, as if the prison's failure had poisoned its reputation forever. Yet the legend refused to sink. Every few years, a new tip surfaced, a blurry photograph, a whispered confession, a letter sent anonymously. In 1979, the FBI finally closed the case, declaring the men presumed drowned. But the word presumed left the door wide open. Then came 2013, 51 years after that cold night. A letter arrived at a San Francisco police station. Its handwriting was shaky, the ink faded. "My name is John Anglin. I escaped from Alcatraz in June 1962 with my brother Clarence and Frank Morris. I'm 83 years old now. I have cancer. I want help before I die." The letter went on to describe details only the real John Anglin could have known, small, intimate facts about the cell layout, the homemade tools, even the guard who used to hum country songs during inspection. "We made it that night," it read. "Barely. The water was cold, brutal. Frank didn't make it. My brother and I did. We've lived quietly ever since." The letter ended with an address in Northern California, though by the time agents traced it, the trail had gone cold. No fingerprints, no DNA match. The FBI kept the letter hidden for years, releasing it to the public only in 2018 after pressure from journalists. Its authenticity remains unproven, but handwriting experts said the odds were more likely than not that it was genuine. To this day, investigators and historians still debate what really happened that night. Some insist the freezing water and deadly currents would have claimed their lives within minutes. Others point to the Anglin family's later photos, allegedly showing the brothers in Brazil during the 1970s, grinning beside a farm truck. Forensic analysts at the University of Michigan compared the photos with known images of the Anglins and concluded there was strong facial similarity. But without bodies, no one could ever be sure. Frank Morris, the mastermind, remains the most elusive figure. He left behind no family, no trace, just a legend. Some believe he died on the raft, others that he fled south and started anew under an alias. A few former inmates swore they saw him in Chicago years later, working quietly as a mechanic. The FBI dismissed these claims, but the whispers never stopped. Today, Alcatraz stands silent, its cells empty but alive with stories. Tourists walk past cell B, 138, Frank's cell, peering through the same hole he carved 6 decades ago. They can almost hear the echo of his chisel scraping concrete, the hiss of the sea beyond the walls. Rangers tell visitors the official story. No one escaped from the rock alive. But if you listen closely, beneath the hum of the wind and the gulls, it's as if the island itself disagrees. Maybe they died that night, claimed by the current. Or maybe they did what the government said was impossible. They disappeared into the world, free men, shadows in plain sight. And somewhere, perhaps in a quiet town far from the bay, an old man once smiled at the television when he saw the news replay of the escape. Maybe he whispered to himself, "We made it." They broke out of the fortress and vanished into legend. If you think this was the perfect escape, wait till you hear about the next one. Hit subscribe, because this mystery, like the tide, never truly rests.